My name is Daria Graham. I am the Associate Dean of Students and the Executive Director for the Office of Multicultural Affairs. I stand here greeting you and very excited about tonight's speaker. I've been charged to introduce her and will do so. Terri Freeman was appointed president of the National Civil Rights Museum in November 2014. As president, Freeman is responsible for providing strategic leadership in furthering the museum's mission as an educational and cultural institution. In addition to updating the organization's vision and mission, Ms. Freeman has placed her emphasis on building the organization's reputation as the new public square. While stewarding the integrity of the museum's historic content, Ms. Freeman has expanded the public programming to increasingly focus on contemporary civil and human rights issues such as criminal justice, education, and basic human rights for marginalized populations. A safe space for difficult conversations, Ms. Freeman created Unpacking Racism for Action, a 6-month dialogue program to go deep into issues of implicit bias and structural racism. Through her collaborative approach to the work, she has increased the public engagement fourfold, with visitors to public programs increasingly exponentially more than 300%. We are honored that Ms. Freeman received her bachelor's degree in journalism and communication arts from the wonderful University of Dayton. And then she went on to Howard University to receive her master's degree in organizational communications. She is married to fellow alum, Dr. Boyer G. Freeman, and they are both the proud parents of 3 daughters, 2 grandchildren, and 1 trying to get here as soon as they can. If you would join me in welcoming the amazing, and I've really enjoyed getting to know better, Ms. Freeman.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you. You know, it is very humbling to be asked by your alma mater to come back and give something back to the university that gave me so much. And all day I have been telling people that my experience at UD in the late 70s was incredible. It was really, and it was a life-changing experience for me. And because I actually went to 3 different high schools. So the bonds that I created in high school were not that strong. But the bonds that I created in college were just phenomenal. And UD has always been just a wonderful, when I think about it, I think about all the good times that I had. And I'll tell this short story before I get started. Just so, I'm very human. So human, in fact, that I almost didn't make it out of UD. I went to pick up my cap and gown, and they were looking for my name, and they said, oh, Ms. Lee, you're not graduating. I'm like, what? You're failing political science. I'm like, no. They're like, no, we can't give you a cap and gown. And I'm like, oh my God. And all I could think of was Barbara Lee, my mother, killing me. So somehow I was gonna have to get out of this university. So I ran to my then boyfriend, now husband's, apartment, and he actually was in the political science class with me. And I'm crying, I'm sobbing. I'm like a week out from graduation. And he's like, I told you to stop playing around. I told you to do what you needed to do. Oh, what am I going to do? My mother's going to kill me. He said, well, you need to go talk to the professor and see what the professor will do, and you need to prepare yourself to potentially talk to your mother. I'm like, I can't talk to my mother. So I went and I talked to the professor, and we chatted for a while, and he said, okay. And he gave me a half a semester's worth of work to do in about 3 days. And I took that work back over to my boyfriend's house. I said, we got work to do. He was like, wee-oo. But he did help me. I got a C, And I walked across that stage, and my mother did not find this out until I did the commencement speech for University of Memphis 2 years ago, and I mentioned it, and her face was like, huh? So I had a wonderful time while I was here at UD. So to President Spina, thank you. I had the pleasure of meeting him in September when I came back, and I think that the university is certainly on the right track. To Professor Crum, to Kathleen, to Dr. Graham. Where is she? Where is she? Oh, okay. To Dr. Graham. I'm going to make sure I call her that like 5 more times, and then I'm done. I thank you all for inviting me. So you wanted me to speak about the relevance of Dr. King's message today. First, let me say it is an honor and a privilege and a blessing to be able to steward the National Civil Rights Museum. It is a treasure. If you have not been there, I would encourage you to come. It is an experience that moves everyone differently, but if you can't be moved at the National Civil Rights Museum, you just aren't human. So it is a very, very moving experience, and not being a historian, I feel that much more humbled by the fact that I have been charged to steward this organization. But Dr. King's message is incredibly relevant today. Often when people think about King, they think of this historical figure who was instrumental in improving integration using nonviolent means, despite the violence and vitriol that he and others suffered. They hearken back to the March on Washington, which was actually the March on Washington for jobs and freedom, but a lot of times we seem to cut off the jobs and freedom part. And they hone in on the I Have a Dream speech. Or they think about his final prophetic mountaintop speech that was delivered at Mason Temple on April 3rd, 1968. But they emphasize the section that he delivered that was around his untimely death, that he kind of prophesied his own untimely death. Rarely do people focus on the full content of either of those speeches, nor do they reference some of his lesser-known speeches, which, to all the students, if you haven't read them, I encourage you to. Beyond Vietnam, which was delivered at Riverside Church in New York on April 4th, 1967, a year before he was assassinated. Where Do We Go From Here, which was delivered August 16th, 1967 at the 11th Annual SCLC Convention in Atlanta, or his March 31st, 1968 speech, which I like to call the Stay Woke speech. And the title of it is Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution. And he delivered that at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. I mention these speeches in particular because they are virtually a window into what is our world today. And even the 2 speeches most commonly known by the masses speak to the issues that seem to continue to plague our nation: racism, jobs, equity, and justice. So let's start with some context of the mid-1960s. Lyndon Johnson is president. The backdrop for the times is the Vietnam War and the continuing movement for full citizenship rights. The country was in the midst of very, very turbulent times where change and transition were inevitable but would not occur without struggle or fight. It was increasingly clear that young African Americans were not satisfied with the speed of progress as race riots broke out in cities across the nation: Watts, Newark, Plainfield, New Jersey, Minneapolis, Detroit, Milwaukee, and Washington, D.C. King, now a Nobel Peace Prize recipient and the face of the civil rights movement, had accomplished the task of desegregating the public buses in Montgomery, Alabama, successfully secured both a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act, and desegregated public accommodations and interstate transportation throughout the South. He then denounces the Vietnam War during his speech at Riverside Baptist Church, and within moments of the delivery of the speech, much of the country's power structure, media, and even many clergy denounce King. Yet there are bright spots on the landscape of change. Loving versus Virginia is heard by the Supreme Court, and the bench declares laws prohibiting interracial marriage to be unconstitutional. Thurgood Marshall is sworn in as the first African-American Supreme Court justice, and Carl Stokes becomes the first African-American mayor of a major U.S. city, Cleveland, Ohio. Things were changing on the leisure and education front as well. In 1966, Marvel Comics introduced what? See, everybody knows that now, but everybody didn't know that. Because I didn't. I'll tell you, when the movie came out, I said to my daughter, oh, I'm going because I want to see this movie about the Black Panthers. She's like, Mommy, no. It's not about the Black Panthers. Okay, so I got it now. So Black Panther was introduced in '66. In 1968, and this was very important to me, Mattel introduced Christy, Barbie's first black friend. And in 1968, NBC launched the first sitcom starring an African-American lead. I know some of y'all know what this is. The name of the show was? Julia, that's right. And the actress was? Diane Carroll. In 1968, Naomi Sims, a black model, landed the cover of Ladies' Home Journal, the first one ever, while college student and part-time model Katiti Karande won Glamour magazine's Best Dressed College Girls contest and became the first black cover model for Glamour magazine. It was really a time of extremes. In February 1968, provoked by the deaths of two Memphis sanitation workers, Robert Walker and Echo Cole, a sanitation strike ensues in Memphis, Tennessee. Howard University students in 1968 take over the administration building in protest to the Vietnam War, and President Johnson announces that he will not seek re-election. Martin Luther King is compelled to interrupt his next human rights campaign, the Poor People's Campaign, to visit Memphis to march with and support the sanitation workers. And on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel, he is assassinated. In just a few short months, Robert F. Kennedy would be assassinated as well. It was a very turbulent time. So fast forward to the 21st century. In September 2011, a group of young activists began a leaderless movement entitled Occupy Wall Street. The movement was initiated by a group called Ad Busters. Using the technology of the 21st century, they launched a website and called for a march and sit-in at the New York Stock Exchange. Their goal was to fight against the corrosive power of major financial corporations, multinational corporations, and the role of Wall Street in the Great Recession, basically arguing the role of capitalism in American society. More specifically, their concerns were income inequality, corporate greed, and the increasing influence of money in politics. With the slogan of "We are the 99%, emphasizing the wealth and income disparities in the country. This movement began with an encampment in Zuccotti Park and eventually spread to hundreds of locations around the country. While many consider the Occupy movement a failed movement, many involved then went on to branch out to Black Lives Matter and the fight for 15. In February 2012, a young unarmed Trayvon Martin was murdered at the hands of a neighborhood watch volunteer. His murder and the acquittal of his murderer was the stimulus for Alicia Garza, Patrice Coolers, and Opal Tomate to launch the hashtag Black Lives Matter. The hashtag quickly grew into a movement as other young, unarmed African-American men and women became victims of police shootings and continued terrorism by a criminal justice system that can certainly seem criminal, but not very just. Black Lives Matter is a member-led global network with more than 40 chapters, very similar to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Also in 2012, 200 fast food workers walked off the job in New York City protesting the minimum wage that would not allow them to take care of their families. These workers, fast food service, home health aides, hospitality workers, and yes, adjunct professors, launched as the face of the working poor, the fight for 15. All three of these movements are millennial-led movements. not unlike the sit-ins and the freedom rides of the 1960s. Each of these movements developed out of a frustration and concern of the lack of transparency and accountability of public institutions and demonstrated a deficit between the principles of democracy and reality. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Last week, thousands of people from around the globe descended on Memphis, Tennessee to pay homage to Dr. King, acknowledge his profound contribution to freedom and equality, yet recognize the unfinished agenda he so aptly described in his speeches. They came recognizing that although 50 years have passed, hate and violence continue on a vicious path. The hate of King's Day was clothed in hoods and sheets. Today, the uniform is polo shirts, khakis, and tiki torches. Bigotry used to hide behind the Jim Crow laws of the South. Now it is represented by the institutional and structural racism that creates resegregated schools, income and wealth disparities for people of color, and the remarkably high incarceration rates of African American men. The new Jim Crow, as penned by Michelle Alexander, couldn't have even been imagined by Dr. King in 1968. They came recognizing that 50 years prior, King's purpose was to support labor and call for better wages and working conditions and equity for 1,300 sanitation workers. Yet today, even with improved working conditions, the federal minimum wage is $7.25, and it has not changed since 2009. And it does not classify as a livable wage in any state in the union. In fact, a livable wage for a single person in Dayton, Ohio is $10.40. Add children and you're up to approximately $25 an hour. In fact, in his speech, Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution, King challenges this bootstrap mentality, which continues to be bandied around today. He says, there are those who still feel that if the Negro is to rise out of poverty, if the Negro is to rise out of slum conditions, if he is to rise out of discrimination and segregation, he must do it all by himself. They never stop to realize that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. But beyond this, they never stop to realize the debt they owe. They came last week acknowledging and recommitting to the methods King used to achieve change: nonviolent civil disobedience and direct action. They came searching for their role to continue the fight for freedom and justice, still recognizing that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. They came with a rekindled respect for their citizenship right to vote, understanding that each of us have the power to change the system through the use of our vote and by applying pressure from outside the system. They came to the museum marching, using their voice to advocate with and for those that are marginalized in our society. And they came recognizing that the most effective approach is coalition building of diverse yet like-minded individuals to achieve Dr. King's dream of the beloved community. King's message continues to resonate throughout our society. In his speech, Where Do We Go From Here?, he states, in spite of a decade of significant progress, the problem is far from solved. The deep rumbling of discontent in our cities is indicative of the fact that the plant of freedom has grown only a bud and not yet a flower. This statement was in response to the unrest in the urban core that occurred during the mid-1960s, but it could have just as easily been said about the responses to the murders of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Maryland. In King's words, riots are the language of the unheard. His message continues to resonate today when he writes in a letter from Birmingham jail to his fellow moderate clergy. He says, there is nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade, but such an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. In the same letter, King condemns the white moderate. These are the folks who now look back on Dr. King's message and his crusades of civil disobedience and direct action through what I call rose-colored glasses, while denigrating the young activist of Black Lives Matter who use his same methods. His words to this group were damning. He says, "I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will." And that quote reminds me of a quote from another famous person who said, "I don't want you if you're lukewarm. You got to be hot or you got to be cold." King's words push us not only to examine ourselves and our perspectives, but to examine the king we may not know. It requires us to ask the question, am I more interested in what is popular, politic, or what is right? As we think of King and his practical message around jobs and economic equity, quality education, fair housing, and justice, we must ponder how far we've actually come since 1968. Consider this. The poverty rate in Dayton stands at 35.5%, with childhood poverty at 53%. I want that to settle in a little bit. 53%. That means, on average, you see two kids, one plus a part of that other kid is in poverty. And if we are satisfied, if we can be okay with that, I don't really need any other stats. If we can be okay with childhood poverty at the levels that it's at in this country, there is truly something wrong with us. Your state minimum wage is $8.15 per hour, yet the livable wage, as I've already mentioned in the county, is $10.40 per hour without children. Likewise, in Memphis, Tennessee, the place that I now call home, the poverty rate overall is 20.8%. Overall childhood poverty is 34.5%, but childhood poverty for African Americans is 48%. The state minimum wage, because Tennessee does not have a state mandated minimum wage, so they use the federal minimum wage is $7.25, while the living wage for Shelby County is $10.78. A single person making the minimum wage in each of these cities lives in poverty and requires some other support to make a living wage. And if they are a single parent, we get 2 generations growing up in poverty. And we know it is much harder today to move up the socioeconomic ladder. These people represent what we call the working poor. And King would consider this term an oxymoron. How can you work in this country and still be poor? This situation of minimum versus living wage is a structural deficiency that creates an inequity that not only creates too little money, but creates the need to work more hours. If you're a single parent, more hours equals less time to parent. Insufficient funds create more problems than simply a bounced check. Insufficient funds create health disparities, increased risk of being involved with the criminal justice system, mental health issues, and educational inequities. In speaking to the relevance of King today, I come back to his words. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. And while he praised philanthropy, he noted that philanthropy is commendable, but it must not cause the philanthropist to overlook the circumstances of economic injustice which make philanthropy necessary. In his final book, King asked the question, where do we go from here? And he gave us a choice, chaos or community. If we are to choose community, we need to more fully examine and take immediate action to significantly decrease poverty. How can it be just that the richest 1% in our country hold 38% of the nation's privately held wealth, while the bottom 90% have 73% of the nation's debt? How can we be satisfied with the richest 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 90%? In his book, King argued for a guaranteed income that would eliminate poverty, and he advocated for peace by arguing that dollars being spent to fight a war against an unknown enemy be diverted to fight the greatest threat to our nation, poverty. The detrimental effects of poverty have already been outlined, but its most insidious outcome is hopelessness. For without hope, there is no fear of consequences, and there is no respect of person, place, or thing. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message is a message of hope because it is rooted in faith. In Hebrews 11:1, we find this definition. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This is why King's message remains as relevant today as in 1956 when he got involved with the Montgomery bus boycotts. King adeptly wraps hope in the cloak of faith and then surrounds it by the harsh realities of the time. He doesn't lean solely on faith, but requires us to put works behind our faith. His message is relevant today because he has demonstrated the sacrifice that is required to create change, making the ultimate sacrifice of laying down his life for his brother. His work was not rhetorical. He was not a dreamer. He had a dream, but his work was real. Most importantly, he has provided us with a roadmap of the issues we need to tackle and a blueprint of the tactics we can employ to make this promise of America a reality for all of its citizens. As we continue to be confronted by social issues in this country and around the globe, there is no doubt that King's approach and effectiveness will be studied and emulated by the generations to come. In fact, it already has been. We always talk about King's dream and ask if it has been fulfilled. The answer is not yet. The dream of freedom, justice, and equity will require all of us to maintain a level of expectancy and expend focused energy to make the dream a reality. Is King's message relevant in this 21st century? The answer is simply yes. Thank you.
So we have just a few minutes for Ms. Freeman to take questions. You'll see microphones in the aisles. If you are interested in asking questions, we invite you to do so now.
Sentiment and visibility. Neo-Nazi group, we know about Charlottesville, the violence that accompanied their marches, and we debate about, okay, what's this about? Has it grown? Was it simply they felt freedom to be more visible? And I just wonder, so this isn't the KKK of the past. This is 2018, and I wonder what your take on all of this, and King was alive today, what he might make of this. Because this seems like something that we should have gotten past decades ago, but obviously we're not. So many people who are not Hispanic whites obviously feel threatened, okay, in an undefined, unarticulated way, and just invent reasons and lash out.
So that's a loaded question. So I'm going to actually agree with the president on one thing. There is a lot of fake news out there. There is. And there's been an environment created that says we're pitting you against them. And if you don't do something about them, they're going to take away from you, right? So you got to always be on the lookout. The media has done a phenomenal job of keeping all of us afraid of whatever it is. So in Memphis, there was this commercial that they have on early in the morning. I'm getting dressed for work, and it was an agricultural commercial company. And there was some type of chemical that they were using for nematodes. Anybody know what a nematode is? I didn't know what a nematode was, but I was scared to death that they were gonna come and get my yard and tear my yard up because of the way the media framed these, these commercials. And I think that we are living in an era where, we got a 24-hour news cycle. You gotta have something to fill all that time. So if it's the truth, if it's mostly the truth, well then let's use what's mostly the truth, not the full truth. So I think that that's a part of it. I do think that that we are so polarized right now in this country because of rhetoric. I do think an ugly, ugly form of racism was raised out of the ground when Obama was elected. It started immediately. While there was a group that said, oh, we're this post-racial society, there was another group that hollered out, you lie, on the floor of Congress to the President of the United States, and you would never do that. I wasn't a George Bush fan, but nobody deserved to throw a shoe at him. So there was a level of respect that was lost based on a certain group of folks, and that ugly racism began to grow then. And frankly, that group of people started really organizing. And other folks who were happy that they had elected an African-American president got a little complacent. We got a little complacent. We let things get by us. And so I think the lesson in this is that we all have to stay awake. We have to keep watch, and we have to be engaged civically. It's not just about going and voting and then sitting down somewhere. We have got to be persistent in our focus in our local communities that then roll up to our federal. Let me answer the question about King. I think King would be appalled about that, but I'm not so certain that he would be totally surprised about it. Hate is one of those things, again, that if you get it and I don't get it, then I've got a reason to have a problem with you. And if I can use something like your blackness, or your speaking a different language, or your choosing to love a partner who is the same sex as you, or your religion, then that's what I'll use. And I think it's unfortunate, and I think we have to really be, I don't really care what a person's ideology is. Of course there are people on the left side of the spectrum. Of course there are people on the right side of the spectrum. That's just the way it's going to always be. But we ought to be able to be civil. And we've lost a level of civility, I think, in our country, and we've got to get it back. Sir?
So when Dr. King started expanding his work on poverty and criticizing the Vietnam War, he had blowback, not just from the broader message, but from within the anti-racist movement saying, don't dilute the struggle, focus on the issue. And he made the argument for it. One, all, and he made the argument of the necessity of the interaction between poverty and race. We seem to still be struggling with that in the movement that we have, the Black Lives Matter, the participatory. How do we begin to address that? Black is this difficult, unspoken, unargued, really unaddressed issue in our discourse, in our political discourse, also in our discourse for social justice. And it seems to be this barrier in American society. We cannot seem to figure out how to work our way around. Do you see us doing that, and the methodology that we have, and who is doing it in ways that you think can be sustainable and also
So a couple of things. Okay, so you can always have people screaming and hollering at somebody. I say to public officials, get over it. You asked for the job. That's a part of the job. So a couple of things. So first, the practical thing. So on May 13th, William Barber out of North Carolina is launching the new Poor People's Campaign. It will be happening in 40 states in the country. I do not have all the specifics. I know that the intention is that it will start in Marks, Mississippi, which folks, Marks, Mississippi is in as bad a shape, if not worse, as it was in 1968. They said it was the only place where Dr. King went and he cried because of what he was seeing in Marks, Mississippi. They have lost their hospital. Their school system has lost its accreditation, and there are children and families growing up in Marks, Mississippi. So they're going to start in Marks, Mississippi, and they're going to make their way to D.C., is my understanding. But there will be these encampments throughout the country. I think a large part of this is really about looking at this idea of a livable wage. I'm not one who necessarily thinks $15 is the thing. Because for me, I say, well, is that just $15? Is that $15 plus benefits? Does $13 plus benefits equal a livable wage? If I'm living in Podunk, do I need $15 as a livable wage? There are so many variables, but I understand why they have chosen a number. And fight for 15, the alliteration works. So I do get it. So I think that the practical thing is go online, look for the Poor People's Campaign, and see what you might be able to do. The other thing is that out of all, I think there were 26 debates during the last political campaign. Nobody mentioned poverty. The word was never mentioned. But that's our fault, because see, I believe that these folks that I actually have the audacity to believe that they work for me. I believe that I am their boss and that I have every right to tell them when they're doing a good job and when they're doing a bad job. But until we all decide, because I'm not powerful enough to just overturn everything that I see wrong, but we are powerful enough. So I think that we have to just stay in it. It is not, you got to vote for school board just like you vote for president. In fact, school board is probably more important than president. And so I think one of the things that I'm very pleased with is this whole never again movement. But the interesting thing about never again, I'm going to throw this out there, and this is going to rub some people the wrong way. Black folks have been asking people to stop killing them since Trayvon Martin was killed. White folks say, stop killing us, do something about these guns, and people listen. I just want you to think about that. That's what Black Lives Matter has been saying. Stop killing us. So we have to listen to all of our young people. There can't be a better than. Everybody wants to live a long life, right? So when these young people, black or white, start to speak, we need to listen to them. And I'm very hopeful that they will stick with it. Because, see, they're not trying to impress anybody like adults. They want some action. And all of them are going to vote. I'm convinced that they are going to vote. For millennials, let me say one thing, then I'll get to your question. I want you all to know that the stats on millennial voting is awful. So there's a lot of hashtags going on out there, but it's not enough voting. You know who's voting? Seniors. Do you think seniors all have your best interest at heart? No, they have their best interest at heart. I know I'm going to vote for my best interest. So I think the stat is something like 60% or so of senior citizens vote. 10% of millennials. And millennials are a larger number. You're about competing numbers now with the baby boomers getting old and millennials. You're about a competing number. Y'all got to vote. The gentleman mentioned the fact that when King denounced the Vietnam War, it wasn't just Johnson and the rest of Congress and the media that said he's a preacher. He shouldn't be talking about world affairs. There's a whole bunch of his inner circle. And some of those inner circle people who are still alive now act like they always love King. Oh, I just love Dr. King, Dr. King, Dr. King. And they're perpetrating. And in fact, many would say we're somewhat in the situation that we're in now because the black church is a bit of a co-conspirator. Jesus was a radical. Jesus was a radical. He would not be sitting still looking at this foolishness. He was a radical. Dr. King was a radical. To decide to choose nonviolence when people are spitting on you, throwing things at you, using water hoses and dogs, to choose nonviolence is a radical approach to dealing with violence. When I look at Black Lives Matter, I don't know that first off, everybody will say, well, who's the leader? Well, we don't necessarily have to have a leader. There were many leaders in the civil rights movement. It was just that King was such a big personality. There were many leaders, many different methods. But you do have this undercurrent now of people like William Barber, James Forbes, who he's older, but he's still in it. Tracy Blackman out of Ferguson. You have those ecumenical leaders. You have rabbis who are in this movement. You have coalitions being built. And so I think that we can't just do one-for-one comparison of Black Lives Matter, but we can say, and the civil rights movement of the 20th century, but we can say, look at some of the tactics. Look at the marching. Look at the civil disobedience. Look at the disruption of traffic. You know, they shut down the bridge in Memphis in 15, and I remember hearing folks saying, gosh, it's so inconvenient. Yeah. That's what a protest is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be happy times, you know. It's supposed to be inconvenient. That's the whole point, right? So I think that there are similarities, yet I think that there are uniquenesses to the movement. I think we need the church because I think faith is such an important component to have to keep things kind of on track, right? So we don't get too far out there. At the same time, we need the moral leadership that doesn't have egos attached to it, that have to have their names on the and y'all know what I'm talking about. That's what we need. We need moral leadership that is going to be supportive. And I say that, frankly, about the older people that want to be supportive as well. You can't tell young people what to do. You can help guide. If they have questions, you can help direct, but let them do it. We already messed it up. All right, so it's your turn. And I'm here and ready to support you, but I'm not going to tell you all how to do it. You have to do it how you believe is going to work for you and for the masses. No, actually, these are actually really comfortable.
I want to thank you again, Ms. Freeman, and to thank you on behalf of our university is our illustrious president, Dr. Smina. I do want to mention that as much as I've heard and been the daughter of a civil rights activist and pastor, I've seen us be distracted by the politics of race and social justice. And I believe I stand in the middle of two giants who are not being distracted, but continue to work for the betterment of all, for the University of Dayton and for us as a global community. So I thank you both. Thank you.
I don't want to shoo you away. So three things to do here. First, I want to thank Professor Crum. Where's Professor Crum? And Professor Amin, thank you for organizing not only tonight, but also last week, this very special recognition of Dr. King. So round of applause, please. And then I want to thank Terri. This was marvelous, really poignant and compelling. We're all leaving here better informed, hopefully fired up, and really very appreciative of you coming home. So thank you, and if you don't mind, we're going to express a great deal of pride to have you back. On an annual basis, we tell our first-year students and our graduating seniors that a UD education opens up a vast horizon of possibility. We also tell them that where they begin their careers is rarely an indicator of where their careers will take them in service to the communities where they live. Your career, taking you to the presidency of the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Hotel, is not merely a case in point. Your career is a model of what it means at UD to be deeply and broadly formed in the Catholic and Marianist tradition of education for adaptation and change. What is more, your leadership in Memphis around preserving and advancing the crucial legacy of Dr. King lends remarkable luster to our larger goal of becoming the university for the common good. This is our goal and our mission here in Dayton and well beyond, as our graduates not only engage with and work to improve their communities, but bring a sense of servant leadership to what it means for all God's children to live and thrive in community. Thank you, Terri. And in gratitude, we'd like to present you and the museum you so ably direct with the very purposeful gift that has been made for this occasion by Kyle and Kelly Phelps, and is now being unveiled by these two gentlemen. Actually, before you pull it off, give me one more minute. Kyle Phelps is a professor of sculpture here at UD. Kelly Phelps, his brother and collaborator, is professor of sculpture and chair of the art department at Xavier University. So I'll ask them to unveil, and then I'll talk a little bit about what they've done. They have produced and just unveiled a work entitled The Moment. The Moment. Your museum at the Lorraine Motel will forever be identified with the famous black and white photograph of the moment of Dr. King's assassination and his collapse on the second floor balcony. That photograph, sadly, is now a national image, a dismal American icon of collective tragedy. So recognizable is that photograph that we easily forget that all across America, the sad and shattering news of Dr. King's murder had to have been experienced not through that photograph or through a news bulletin or on Twitter, but more intimately by solitary individuals who were alone when somehow, from someone close at hand, news came to them and the weighty import of the moment began to sink deeply into their being. Nationally recognized and widely exhibited, Kyle and Kelly Phelps have long made moving works about working-class America, and particularly about the blue-collar factory experience of African Americans. Many of their works feature small groups of workers, men and women, on assembly lines. Here in The Moment, they poignantly focus instead on a solitary worker, his eyes cast down, searching the depths of frightful loss and uncertainty just after he has learned the news of Dr. King's murder. Terri, your alma mater presents this work to you and to our museum in the hopes that this artistic vision of a private moment of pain around a mountainous national loss might find a telling place for you and others as you continue your good work illuminating our national understanding of what so tragically happened there at the Lorraine Motel 50 years ago. Thank you for coming home to UD, where we value the work you do every day. Thank you. I thank everyone for coming, and please, before you go, come and take a look at this incredible sculpture. Kelly and Kyle, thank you.